Welcome. Thank you for coming. It's a different vibe. Rabbi Lappe is here. We've been some of the first conversations that Lauren and I had last June when we were dreaming about what we would be doing this year. We would just share great teachers of Torah back and forth. And at one point, we sent Rabbi Lappe's Eli talk to each other, and then we just started talking about it for days and days and days and back and forth and reading it back and forth. And we said, that rabbi has to teach in our Beit Midrash. And it's happening. And so we're really excited. Let's start with a blessing. Let's start with Lasok B'divrei Torah, and then I'll give an introduction. Together. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kichanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. Okay, good. All right. Rabbi Benay Lappe is the founder and Rosh Yeshiva of Svara, a traditionally radical yeshiva. An award-winning educator specializing in an application of queer theory to Talmud study, Rabbi Lappe has served on the faculties of the University of Illinois, Temple University, the University of Judaism, now AJU, the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, the Graduate Theological Union Center for Jewish Studies at UC Berkeley, the Wexner Institute, and the Milken Community High School. During her tenure as Director of Education at Congregation Beit Simchat Torah in Manhattan, Rabbi Lappe founded CBST's Lair House Judaica, which has served over 10,000 students to date. Rabbi Lappe currently serves as the Director of Education and Senior Fellow at the Institute for the Next Jewish Future in Chicago and is Associate at CLAL, the National Jewish Center for Learning and Leadership. Ordained by the Jewish Theological Seminary in 1997, Rabbi Lappe was named to the Forward's 2014 Most Inspiring Rabbis list, and because it's in your bio, and I'm going to say it, Jewrotica's Sexiest Rabbis of 2013 list.
They have a different understanding of what sexy means, okay? Let's say that.
If it's online, I get to say it. Learning and teaching Talmud are her greatest passion, but you should know that Rabbi Lappe is also a licensed pilot, a shoemaker, and a patent-holding inventor. Yeah. Perfect. I will. Okay. All right. No, I won't do that now. Without further ado, we're happy that your Torah is going to be in this house of Torah, this Beit HaMidrash, this place of sacred gathering. So thank you for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Are you hearing me? Not quite. Yes, you are. Okay, good. How's that? A little bit better, right? Okay, good. Thank you so much. Hang on to them. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. I want to to tell you a story. It was my first day of rabbinical school, and the dean was to meet the new students. And he was a half hour late, and when he finally arrived, he said, "I'm so sorry." He apologized profusely. He said, "As I left my office, the phone rang." And he picked it up, and it was Stephen Cohen. You know what Stephen Cohen is? Stephen Cohen is a prominent Jewish sociologist, and his specialty is taking the pulse of the American Jewish community. How are we doing? What are the trends? What's going on? And this was 1991, and the 1990 National Jewish Population Survey had just been done, and the statistics had not yet been compiled, and Stephen Cohen's job was to analyze them and to come out with the report. And so the dean said to him on the phone, "Well, what's it going to show?" And Stephen Cohen said, "Well, there's good news and there's bad news. The good news is that Judaism will exist in 100 years. The bad news is that it will be unrecognizable to us." This is my first day of rabbinical school, right? It was a little bit of like, welcome to the Titanic. You know, I wanted to become a rabbi because I was pretty fond of Judaism the way I had inherited it, and now I'm being told it ain't going to be that way. So that was kind of depressing. But then I learned Talmud. And I realized that Stephen Cohen was both right and wrong. I think he is right that Judaism will be unrecognizable to us in 100 years. But I think he's wrong in that it is not bad news. So what I'd like to talk to you about tonight is why this one queer Jew doesn't think it's particularly bad news that we're going to have an unrecognizable Jewish future. And I'd like to talk about where imagination comes in to creating what will be unrecognizable to us. And what does that have to do with being queer? And what do I mean by queer? So, relax. I'll tell you another story, and then we're going to work it out together. So this is going to be a little bit of an audience participation talk. Okay, you willing? Yeah. Okay, good. So I'd like to begin with hypothesis. Well, that's fun. That's cool. And my hypothesis is that all human beings share the same basic big questions of life. No matter when you were born, no matter your race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, gender expression, we all share those same big questions. What are they? The big ones. Why am I here? Who am I? What should I do? Where do I belong? See, I didn't even need to prompt you. You know why? Because these questions are encoded in your DNA. I believe it's what it means to be a human being, to have these questions. Every tradition, every religion, every civilization comes into being for one and only one reason: to answer those basic human questions. And it does so by means of a master story. Master story. If you're Jewish, the master story is called Torah. If you're Christian, the master story is called? Good. You get the idea. If you're American, it's called the American Dream. And if your master story is working for you, you're not even aware that you have questions. You do not walk around going, where did I come from? You know. Your story tells you. What's important? You know. Your story tells you. What's right? What's wrong? You know. But hypothesis number 2. Every story, every master story, will ultimately and inevitably crash. Crash, crash. That story, this crash, one of three things will have happened. You will either, number one, have found another master story whose answers you like better. Or two, some event may have happened in the world to make your answers, your master story's answers, no longer workable. Or three, something inside of you has changed. And the old answers just no longer seem true anymore. That's a crash. How you respond to that crash will determine the kind of person you'll become, the kind of life you'll lead, the kind of world you'll create. And God created the world in 6 days. Carbon dating. Crash. And they lived happily ever after. Divorce. Crash. May you live to be 120. The death of a child. Crash. Men love women and women love men. Oh shit, I'm gay. Crash. Big time crash. So let's take a look at those three possible responses to a crash. Well, option one. You can deny the crash. You can say, no, that didn't happen. And revert to your master story. And what are you going to do? You're going to probably build a big wall around that story to keep all inconvenient information out. Right? That sounds good? You know, every option has its upside and its downside. So, what are the upsides of going option one? It's familiar. You get to hang on to your story. You know the story, right? You get to keep all your goodies. Good. What else? Upside of option one. You do not have to deal with the crash. Crashes are very messy. Yes, you do not have to deal with it. Safe. Yep. Change is hard and painful. No change here. Good. This is static. This is fixed, eternal, unchanging. What else? Upside. Yep.
You get to stick with the people you were with.
Yes. You get your people, and they get you, and you still get an aliyah in shul, and you don't get kicked out of the house, and, right? You don't get fired, and your community is your community. Everybody's happy. Okay, good. What else? Pardon me? Yeah, exactly. A lot of power here. Absolutely. Downside of going option one.
You end up alienated from everything you know.
Sure. You got to keep a lot out to stay in option one. A lot of people. Don't let your kids play with my kids. Don't read that book. Don't go to that movie. I don't want to. Let me tell you a story. When I lived in Israel over a decade ago, there was a dairy company. And the dairy company, this is a true story, they put little dinosaur figures on the milk cartons with little factoids about the dinosaurs. Tyrannosaurus rex, 5 million years old, whatever. Brontosaurus. Is a brontosaurus, is that like a Flintstone character, or is that a real thing? It's a real thing. Okay, Brontosaurus, 5 billion years old. Why do they do that? So the kids will see it and go, Mommy or Daddy, buy that milk. Good. So the mommies or daddies buy the milk, they bring it home. Then what happens? The kid says, what year is it? And the mommy goes, oh, it's 5753. What does that mean? Well, it's been 5,753 years since God created the universe. So how could there be dinosaurs that are 5 billion years old? Crash. Do you know what happened to this milk company? The Rabbanut, the rabbinic authority in Israel, pulled their kashrut certification until they took the dinosaurs off the milk cartons. Why? Because you do not want your master story crashing at the breakfast table. Okay? That's classic option 1. Get the dinosaurs off the milk cartons. Okay? Good. All right. Option 2. You can accept the crash. Yeah? Yeah, it's real. It's happening. And you're going to go off into the story of your crash. You always live in a story. You can't ever get out of a story. You're always in some story. It behooves you to know what story you're in. And that's option 2. Upside of going option 2.
Or you could reinterpret the story.
Okay, you're talking option 3. Hold on to that, and I'll be right with you. Option 2 is actually a rejection of the master story. Option 2 is the baby with the bathwater option. My master story cracked, so the whole thing is a crock. And you're completely rejecting it and jumping off and making a whole story out of this crash material. That's me coming out and moving to Boys Town. That's Belmont and Halstead. It's living in the gay neighborhood, having a gay subculture. That's my whole world. I did that like for a whole decade. It's fun. Happy. Option 2 is a very happy option. You know why option 2 is happy? Why? Yeah, you're no longer dealing with all this shit that crashed, right? And all the flack you're getting from over here. Nobody's bothering you over here. Happy. Everyone agrees with you over here. Right? What else is, go ahead. You get to feel superior about it. Yes, you do. You get to feel superior. What else?
I think in the sense that there's intellectual honesty,
Yeah.
you don't have cognitive dissonance.
That's right.
You reject story number 1.
That's right. There's some intellectual honesty. You believe that yes, absolutely. What else? Yeah. Absolutely. You're living true to that thing that changed in you. This feels honest and right. Good. Downside of going option 2. Yeah. They're not very happy with you, right? And you've lost them. And you've lost all the good stuff that actually wasn't crashing. Stories never crash in their entirety. Pieces of them crash. And when you go option 2, you're leaving behind all the good stuff that was in your master story. Yep.
I'm not sure, does option 2 answer the questions you started out with, or may not?
Yes, that's a good question. Every story is attempting to answer those same basic questions. The question is, does it adequately answer them for you?
It just seems to be when somebody's based on rejection,
Yeah,
it's less likely to answer the question.
yeah.
Based on affirmation.
Mm-hmm.
Depends upon what it's rejecting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you're going for option 2, you're really not drilling into the issues related to the
Yeah, you do carry issues with you. Isn't that something? Yeah, and if you're Jewish, let's say, it turns out that you don't carry around your Jewishness in a suitcase. And you can't really set it down and move on, right? Your master story is a part of you. You can't actually ever leave it behind. So there's some kind of I'm not completely here-ness in option 2, yeah? That's one of the downsides of option 2. And what's our second hypothesis? Every story will ultimately and inevitably crash. And this story too is going to crash, right? And you're going to have to jump off of it and on and on and on. So far, so good? When I first came out, my first response, and by the way, you can do option 1 for a while, you could do option 2 for a while. And we also tend to choose options depending on our personality. Right? Some people are just naturally option 1 people. They tend to be like that. Some people are naturally option 2 people. If you are in a bad relationship, and you have been in a bad relationship for a decade, you are an option 1 person, and you might want to think about that. If you are the kind of person who breaks up with your partner after the first fight, you are an option 2 person, and you might want to think about that. Yeah? So, I thought, when I started to realize that I was gay, no, this is not happening. And I went option 1. And tried to be straight. Tried to go out with the guys that my mother was fixing me up with. I certainly didn't want her to know. And I realized that option 1 is really the path to suicide, which is like a big option 2 move. Option is very big, ultimate option 2 move. And after I was there for a while, I fell in love with a woman, and I realized that love is love. And I ran, not walked, to the gay world and was very happy. Until I wasn't. Because I missed that Jewish part of myself. I missed my Jewish community. And I missed those pieces of myself that weren't there. Now let's put some Jewish meat on the bones here. Let's crank back about 2,000 years. And this Jewish master story, the biblical story, was our handbook for how to be a human being. It told us how to be a person, what's right, what's wrong, what happens after I die, all those big questions. It also told us how to have a relationship with God. If I want to have a thank you, God, for giving me what I have, what kind of relationship, how do I do that? Right. You bring a certain kind of sacrifice to the temple. If I want to have a please, God, heal my mother kind of relationship with God, what am I going to do? Another kind of sacrifice. If I want a please forgive me, God, for that bad thing I did kind of relationship, what am I going to do? Sacrifice. Good. So these kinds of relationships, forgiveness and gratitude, right? Very important. Good. And while the temple was standing, we know how we did that. And then what happened? Crash. Yeah, big physical crash. That happened in the year 70 of the Common Era. Major crash in Jewish history. Let's crank back about 1 year from that. Let's go to 69. Just to make it a little easier. In the year 69, things were looking very bad for the Jews. Right? The temple was going to go down. Everybody knew it was going to happen. Who was going option 1? In the first century. Who was going option 1 in the year 69? I'm going to give you a hint. If you collect your paycheck from the master story, you're going to be an option 1 person. Who's going option 1? Priests are going option 1. Okay? Priests are going option 1. Basically, they couldn't imagine another way to be a Jewish human being. This was the only way of being a human being they could imagine. They went option 1. Who else was going option 1? Who was fighting zealously for option 1? That was a big hit. Oh, yeah, zealous, right? Okay, think Masada and so on. That's option 1. What happened to them? They died. Temple died, they died. Okay. That did not work out very well for them. Who went option 2 in the first century? Not yet. Not yet. You know, I used to think the Christians were option 2 people. I don't think so anymore. I don't think so. Hang on to the Christians. We're going to come back to them. Yep.
Whose name I can't remember, who wrote the Wars of the Jews.
Oh, Josephus? He's such a liar. Yeah. 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 I'm not sure. Where does Josephus... You know, I say he's a liar. You just can't believe anything he said. He told us how many Jews there were back then. He said there were 6 to 8 million Jews in the first century. Who was going option 2? Almost everybody. You know why? Because after a crash, almost everybody goes option 2. Law of nature is such. That's how people are programmed. Most people after a crash go option 2. Some people call that assimilation. Some people call it, I'm out of here because this doesn't make any sense to me. %90 of Jews in the first century went option 2. They said, it's over. Everybody knew that when your temple went down, the relationship between you and God was over. Every tribe's God lived in that temple. So that if you were going on a trip, what would you do to have God's protection? You'd go to your temple, grab a handful of dirt, and put it in your pocket so that God would be with you. Because God was there. And if your temple was destroyed, the deal between you and God was off. That's big. That's a big catastrophe. If I had lived then, I probably would have been here. It's like TV. When you unplug the TV, what happens to the picture? Goes away. Temple goes down, God goes away. Everybody knew that. I'm sure that was the most reasonable response. But there was a small group of queer, fringy, hippie, radical guys who said, no. There's a better way. They said option 1 is not happening. Option 2 is just chaval. It's a pity, right? And these guys went option 3. They accepted the crash. They went back to those motivating, driving, animating questions. They took what still worked from the master story, and they retold that story. New master story. We're going to call that option 3. Those queer, fringy, hippie, radical guys, we call them rabbis. Good. Okay, what do I mean by queer? I don't know if they were gay or not. What do I mean by queer? These were guys for whom, when the temple was still standing, when they could have gone to the temple down the block, they weren't because it wasn't working for them. Instead, here, before that crash, they were meeting in little retreat centers, little ashrams that they called synagogues. Exactly. And they were doing this crazy, newfangled kind of spiritual practice called prayer. Good. And everybody thought they were crazy, but they were onto something.
What was the practice called?
Prayer. Before every crash, there's a crumble. And the queerest people crumble first. The people for whom the master story is working least crumble first. Eventually, all the people who were very happy here will enter the crumble and then the crash. You know the canary in the coal mine? Right? The queer folk are the canary in the coal mine. The people for whom the story is going to crash first. Now I'm playing a little fast and loose with the word queer. On the one hand, I want to suggest that to be queer means to be on the margins, to have insight from the experience of being disenfranchised, the outsider, and to have the courage to live out that outsider experience and bring the insight from that experience to critique the mainstream. That's what it means to be queer. But I also want to play the other side of queer, which is the LGBT side of queer. Because if you are queer, LGBT queer for sure, and lots of other kinds of queers as well, you know what it means to live through a very profound crash in your life. And if you've survived, it means you have the courage to go option 3, in spite of everything that you're going to lose and all of the forces of the world telling you that the master story is really still working. Queer people are very crash flex, whatever your queerness is. If you're LGBT queer, your insight has much less to do with being LGBT. It has less to do with sexual orientation and less to do with gender than it has to do with trusting your kishkis. Trusting the voice inside of you that says, this is my truth. The world's master story actually isn't right. Option 3 folks tend to be people who are very crash flex. The more crash flex you are, the more likely you are to go option 3. So let's go back to those option 3 guys 2,000 years ago, and they created this new master story, the new Jewish master story. The old master story was called? Torah. And the new master story, what did they call it? Not yet. Not yet. Not yet. They said the old story is called Torah and the new story is called Torah. You get it? They said that was Torah and this is Torah. These were salesmen, okay? You've got to be a salesperson. If you are an option 3 leader, you have to be in sales. They said, okay. The old story was written Torah. That was written Torah. This is This is oral Torah. But they were both given, okay. My theological slip is showing at this point, so I have to say, this is the world according to Benay. You do not have to believe it. Okay, this is what I believe. I believe these guys were really, really smart. And I believe they made this shit up. And it was some really good shit, right? It's not about did I make it up or did I not make it up. It's about you making up good shit. Okay? Sorry. And they had to sell this, okay? This is Torah. They call this Torah 2.0. Literally. It first lived in a document called Mishnah. What does Mishnah mean, folks? Second. It means second. Okay? So this is Torah 1.0 and this is Torah 2.0. Yeah? Torah 2.0 would have been, are you ready? Unrecognizable. See where I'm going here? Yeah. Unrecognizable to a biblical Jew. We've been here before. What the hell? Don't be afraid.
Was it really? Don't you think some of the elements in the new master story came from the old master story?
For sure. For sure. Every new master story has three kinds of information in it. Some old stuff that still works. Honor thy mother and thy father. That's old stuff. Can you do that without a temple? Yes. Sure you can. Did the rabbis like it? Yeah, they liked it. They brought that down. Eye for an eye. No. Old stuff. Can you do eye for an eye without a temple? Yes. Sure you can. Did they like it? No, they're not bringing that down. Okay? The stuff you like, you bring with you. Stuff you don't like, you tweak out of existence. And you make it mean something else. And you bring that stuff down. Not eye for an eye, but monetary compensation. I poke out your eye, you can't poke out my eye. Rather, if I poke out your eye, you get to drag me to court. Good, good. And then just some new fantasy material that they make up. Tweak stuff, old stuff, new fantasy stuff that we are going to try out. Some of the new fantasy stuff. Baruch, Atah. Brand new technology that they invented. You're not going to find God in the temple, but they said you can invoke God's presence. God will be here if you say the magic formula. Smart, right? That worked. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Mm-hmm.
And I also apologize for lack of knowledge. The question I'm asking is I might not know every piece, so I apologize for that. I'm sorry to see the question, but I know super option one people. So let's just say a very super option one person. Okay, so for example, my mom is that considered oral Torah?
Yes.
Okay, so then how about the people who are super option one but quote my mom? Are they then not considered super option?
Okay. That's a very profound insight that's motivating that question. Because what you're sensing, and you're quite right, is that option one is a myth. Okay? There really is no such thing as going option one on a tradition that lasts more than about a dozen years. Because if it's more than about a dozen years old, it's an option 3 tradition. But one way to get people to sign up is by telling them that this is the authentic tradition exactly as it's always been. Because some people really I think we're kind of programmed to really like traditional stuff. Stuff that's lasted a long time. It's very comforting. Yeah? So one way to get people to sign up is to say, this is the tradition. The tradition is fixed, eternal, unchanging, immutable, and this is the way it's always been. But if you've been saying that for 2,000 years, you're fucking lying. Because option 1 doesn't work that way, okay? You're just putting an option 3 tradition in option 1 clothing, which is okay, except it really puts a damper on the ability of that tradition to continue evolving, and it disempowers people, all sorts of bad things. Okay. When you have a crash, you never get one option 3. You always get lots of option 3s. And that's what you want in a time of crash. You want lots and lots of option 3s. Lots and lots. Because you never know which ones are going to stick. Plus, option 3s in their initial stages tend to be very partial. They're not a whole diet. They're going to give you some of your vitamins. You're going to get some of your vitamins by maybe going to Svara and learning Talmud. And you're going to get some of your vitamins by going to the spiritual community and davening. You're going to get some of your vitamins by going over to, in Chicago, it's JCUA and doing your social justice stuff over here, or avodah, right? They tend to be very incomplete initially. Eventually, there will be some sort of a merger of these option 3s into a system. Then you'll have your new master story. So lots and lots of option 3s. And back in the 1st century, one of those option 3s actually made it really big. Christianity. That was one of those, right? Very big. And by the way, Christianity was a lot closer to the Jewish master story than the rabbinic Jewish master story. Interestingly, part of why it became very popular. Okay. When was the last time you heard a Jew say, "Spare the rod, spoil the child"? Yeah, you didn't. You don't. A lot of the values of Christianity are closer to the biblical Jewish values, the notion of God and reward and punishment, all sorts of those things, much closer to biblical Judaism than rabbinic Judaism is to biblical Judaism. Yeah.
Kind of central.
Pardon me?
Central to Christianity.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So 500 years into this new rabbinic option 3 thing, you know how many Jews there were who were going along with this? 6 to 8 million in the 1st century. About 500,000. What happened to the rest of them? They went option 2. They didn't die. They weren't killed. They were just out of here. I'm out of here. 500,000 said, yeah, I'll go along with that. And I'm always curious, like, who were those 500,000? Right? Here come the rabbis holding up their matzah, going, this is the Paschal offering. Like, what? That's a damn cracker. Last year, I had a Paschal offering in my patio. That was a sacrifice. That was a Paschal offering. That was a lamb. This is a cracker. You made this shit up. I'm not going with you. Right? And they were going here. Like, who would have believed that? Not me. So I always wonder, like, who was going? Was it the village idiots? Like, were your great-great-great-grandparents the ones who went, oh, yeah, it's a lamb, right? Or were the ones who went along with these rabbis the ones who said, I know you made that shit up. It doesn't feel Jewish to me. It's thin. It's like, what is this? To me, it's not Judaism. But it will be to my great-grandchildren. I think probably that's who our ancestors were. The ones who said, doesn't feel Jewish to me. But I'm going to go along with it. Very few people ever go option 3. And I really want to emphasize this because if it isn't already apparent, I think we're in a major crash. And what we come up with is not going to feel very Jewish. It's not going to work for us completely. Welcome to a crash era. It's a pain in the ass, and it's just not going to feel great for any of us. But that's not because of who we are individually. It's because of this larger phenomenon that we're living through. And we have to try lots of new stuff. It doesn't look very Jewish to us.
Was Reform Judaism a response to a crash? I mean, we're getting further and further.
Okay.
I've done quite a
So,
bit on it.
good question. Is Reform Judaism a response to a crash? Yes. And so is Orthodoxy, and so is conservative Judaism, and so is Zionism, and so are lots of modern options. We've been in a crash, I would say a crumble, for the last 150 years or so, ever since the Enlightenment. Ever since emancipation, we've been in a crash. And the rabbinic Judaism, which is now our master story, has been crashing. Emancipation, Holocaust, modernity, America in which Jews are wealthier, more powerful, have more equality than more dignity than we've ever had in our history. And we're living in a story that tells us how to be an impoverished, beleaguered people, right? Why do you have 2 challahs on your Shabbos table? Yeah. Not just to symbolize abundance. When all week you don't have it, you have 2 challahs on Shabbos, you feel like a king or queen, right? You feel like you're something. But what if you have 2 challahs on your table every night of the week? You get as many challahs as you want. Putting 2 challahs on your table on Shabbos may not be the way to feel dignified and to feel like this is a taste of Olam Haba, right? This is heaven. Yeah.
Has there ever been a generation where it didn't feel like it was a crash? You said it's been about 150 years of crumble crash. Was there ever a time when it wasn't crumbling and crashing?
Yeah, even though I think this is an eternal process and there's some amount of little baby crashes all the time, I don't think there are cataclysmic crashes very often. But I believe we're in one of them right now. So I think 300 years ago, we weren't in a crash. Yep. Absolutely. Every religious master story is in a crash right now. Not just the Jewish master story. Absolutely. Does this make any sense? Yeah. Oh, that's sweet. That's sweet of you. Okay, I'll make a shameless plug for Svara later. To what do I attribute this crash? Like, why are we in this crash?
And what are we doing to react?
Yeah. Look at your own community. I know just a little tiny bit about the history of this community. And where do you think you guys are at? Are you in option 1, an option 2, or an option 3? 3. Yeah. Yeah. You're in option 3. Were you always at option 3 community?
Yes. Because if you, well, some of these people have not read the history of Abbas Israel, but there was a very outstanding history written by Rabbi Rabinowitz, and from the very beginning, it was, to use a cliche, it was to the left. It was always the envelope of the conservative movement. It still is. So I think it's a tradition. That's the
Interesting.
tradition.
Interesting.
As a millennial,
Yeah.
I feel the weight of this crash has been shifted to our shoulders, that we don't care. It's like we're being given up on a bit. So I'm curious about how to empower our generation to be the salesman that can usher us out of this crash.
Yeah.
Have you read Empowered Judaism?
Pardon me?
There's a book called Empowered Judaism. Sounds I like it. I like the book about it.
So, one, I know I didn't completely answer your question to what do I attribute this crash. I want to put a sticky on that. I recognize I haven't fully answered that. I want to tell you what the Jewish tradition has to say about who gets to go option 3. I told you about a group of guys that we call rabbis. But it turns out you don't need to be a rabbi. You don't need the title rabbi to be an option 3 person. You know what the title rabbi gives you? Yeah. There is one and only one privilege, according to Jewish law, that the title rabbi affords you. Yeah, that's true. I actually never thought about that. Okay, so maybe 2. Aside from passing it on. The title affords one who holds it financial indemnity against damages. So, for example, let's say you hire me. I have the title rabbi. You hire me to make sure that the chickens for your child's wedding are kosher. And I come in, I check the chickens, I say kosher. Half hour before the wedding, you find out they're actually not kosher, and I made a mistake. You've got to bring in $10,000 worth of catered chickens. Can you sue me for that $10,000? No, so sorry. But if actually you ask Sybil, who knows just as much about kashrut as me, and you ask her to certify your chickens, yeah, they're kosher, and they turn out not to be, $10,000 of catered chickens, can you sue her? Absolutely. That's it. That's the only benefit to being a rabbi. Most of the rabbis weren't rabbis. We call them rabbis, but most of them weren't rabbis. They had something that you don't have. It's like a little scene from, what's that movie? Wizard of Oz. Yes. You need 2 things to be an option 3 player. You need to be Gamirna and you need to be Savirna. Savirna. Gamirna. What's that about? Knowledge. You need to know your shit. You need to be learned. And you need to have Svara. What is Svara? Moral intuition. Insight into human beings and their relationships. A broad experience of the world, which gives you deep insight. That's Svara. Yeah, absolutely. And the chutzpah to pay the price that exercising those two things and going option 3 is going to entail, 100%. This notion of Svara. 2,000 years ago, those queer, fringy, hippie, radical guys, their actual revolution underneath the going option 3 was to say, we have this sacred text, our scripture. That's what God wants us to do. In their time, the only way you could know what God wanted of you was to read your scripture. That was the only access you had to God's will. The rabbinic revolution was that these guys said, this is one place where you can go to know what God wants of you, but there are actually 4 others. You could look around to see what the community is doing. If we're not prophets, we're children of prophets. So what bracha are they saying before they drink their water? Whatever they say, that's going to be the law. That's minhag, that's custom. Custom is very powerful. Quick story. My chevret and I were sitting in the hallway of the rabbinical school when we were students. He had written his dissertation on the legal halachic feasibility of a double ring wedding ceremony. At that point, this was 15 or so years ago, 20 years ago, at that point, there were only 2 halachic opinions on a double ring wedding ceremony. One opinion said, this is in a heterosexual context, if a man gives a woman a ring and the woman gives the man a ring, what she does with him is, it's like she's whistling Dixie. It's neither here nor there. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't effectuate anything. The other opinion says, right, cancels it out. If she gives him a ring, it cancels his giving her a ring. And no wedding happened at all. But he wanted to find a way for both of these events, the woman acquiring the man and the man acquiring the woman in this heterosexual context, to both be valid and tofes, to have some teeth. Our Talmud professor walked by, David Kramer, and we said, Dr. Kramer, we're trying to figure out a way to make this halak. You know what he said? Just fucking do it. So just go out there and do double ring wedding ceremonies, and when the powers that be see that this is not undermining the fabric of the Jewish community, someone will find a rationale, and that's the power of custom.
Oh my God, next you're going to be letting women marry women and men marry.
I know, right? That's custom. Custom. Ma'aseh. A maisa. This is a source for what God wants. A precedent. Rabbi Aaron does something, Rabbi Lauren does something, all you rabbis, they do something, you can go, oh, that must be okay to do because they did it. I trust them. They wouldn't do bad thing, so I can behave that way because they behave that way. A takana. Legislation. And finally, what is the 5th source? One of the 4 new ones that the rabbis came up with? Svara. Your moral intuition. They said, that's also a place that you could go to find out what God wants of you. Okay, you ready for this? Torah, precedent, custom, legislation, svara. Every practice in our Jewish toolbox has one of 2 statuses. It's either deoraita, straight from God, written in the Torah, straight from God, or it's we made that up. In Hebrew, if it's straight from God, it's written in the Torah, it's called deoraita. If it's we made that up, it's called derabanan. Okay? If it's deoraita, it's really bad if you break it, right? Really bad if you violate it. If it's D'Rabbanan, okay. You look the other way, I could be a little lenient. Good? Okay. If a new law comes out of Torah, D'Oraita or D'Rabbanan? Don't eat a pig. D'Oraita, straight from the Torah. Precedent. Rabbi so-and-so acts this way, I can act that way. Is it D'Oraita or D'Rabbanan? D'Rabbanan. Good. D'Oraita, D'Rabbanan. Custom. The community is acting this way. I think it's safe. We can do that. We can. D'Rabbanan. Legislation. Rabbi so-and-so stood up and made a declaration. D'Rabbanan. Svara. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the climax of our story. If a law comes out of Svara, my kishkis tell me so. D'Oraita. What is going on there? Equal in status to the Torah. Not only that, if your Svara and your Torah conflict, guess what? Svara can trump Torah. What's behind that? What is going on there? Yep. It is the belief that created in the image of God. God wants us to utilize what we've got and to decide how we should live, even if we get it wrong. The entire process of option 3 is driven by Svara. The entire Jewish tradition is driven by Svara. My yeshiva is called Svara. Yeah. Absolutely not. Absolutely. When I share this with a Christian audience, they think we're crazy. Yeah. Does Christianity have a similar kind of my kishkis can trump? No. Yes?
Yeah, there's ways of whether it's like praying on it, the spirit, there are ways that moral intuition comes in to people's understanding.
You know what? I should stay out of this because I don't know. I won't say.
And if your Svara is strong enough, depending on the story, could lead you away.
Absolutely. Svara is very dangerous. Very, very dangerous concept. Guess what? They never taught this in rabbinical school. Did you ever learn the word Svara in rabbinical school? I didn't. Uh-huh. That's great. Uh-huh, yeah. Okay, I want to point a couple things out. I thought I made this up. I thought I was really, really smart. I thought I made this up. And somebody once said to me, Benay, that's just Darwin. And I said, say more. Because that's what you say when you're a teacher and you have no idea what your student is talking about. Say more. and they said, yeah, Darwin's basic slogan was, it's a different one. Adapt, migrate, or die. Adapt, migrate, or die. So what did Darwin say? That any species, when confronted with a threat to its survival, has 3 and only 3 options. Adapt, migrate, or die. What's adapt? Option 3. Migrate? 2. Die? 1. Isn't that interesting? So, by the way, don't think I'm bagging on orthodoxy, okay? This is not orthodoxy. This is all of us, okay? Every movement is option 1 right now. Jesus, I think Jesus was in option 3. But this has now become its own option 1. Yeah. One more thing. So I'm practicing this little talk. I say to my accountant, sit in front of me and listen. Tell me how I'm doing. I was practicing for my TEDx talk. Okay, listen to me. And I give her the talk, and she says, well, that's just fight or flight. And she says, fight or flight isn't just fight or flight. You know what it's really called? Fight, flight, or freeze. Who knew? Who knew? I didn't know that. Fight, flight, or freeze. So it turns out about 100 years ago, biologists discovered that any animal, when confronted with a threat, will do one of these 3 things: fight, flight, or freeze. What's freeze? 1. What's flight?
2.
What's fight?
3.
Right. And then about 20 years ago, because I checked it out on Wikipedia, it turns out they said every animal will do one of 2 things first: flight or freeze. That we're all programmed to do either flight or freeze first. Isn't that interesting? 1 or 2. Most people think it's take it or leave it. I live in the suburbs. I drive up to my house. I get out of the car. There's inevitably a bunny on my lawn. Okay? I get out of my car. What does the bunny do? Of course, it freezes, because bunnies are programmed to freeze. I get into my house. I see a mouse. What does a mouse do? Runs, because mice are programmed for flight. If one of those 2 responses doesn't work, then the animal's going to turn and fight. But that's going to be a last resort. Option 3 is a fucking fight. It's a pain in the ass. It is not ever going to feel great. It's a struggle. There's a big cost to it. But if you go this way, it just might feel Jewish to great-grandchildren. Yep.
Did you say before that very few people are option 3?
Very few people. You know what? I don't think that's the case.
It might depend on the issue.
Yeah, it might depend on the issue. And you might be an option 3 person on one issue, and you might be an option 2 person on another issue, and option 1 on another issue.
In relationships, which felt
Mm-hmm.
but,
Yeah. And by the way, you want some people to go option 1, and you want some people to go option 2, and you want some people to go option 3. I'm very interested in what happens when option 2 people come back. Really, you know what you get when option 2 people come back to Judaism? Yoga minions. You get yoga minions. That's very important. They bring stuff from out here that's really good shit, and they make it Jewish. Guess what? That's how this thing works. And you know what you get when some people go option 1? They save stuff that you don't think should be saved. And then later on you go, oh my God, I'm so glad you saved that, because that really is good. We have the Talmud here because people who went option 1 were like, oh, we got to save this. You know how we pass the Torah around in shul? Very carefully. Pass it down. Right? And we tell our children that this is our job, to hold the Torah very carefully. Don't mess with it. Don't drop it. Pass it down. And if you pass it down and they pass it down to their children exactly the way they received it, they did the right thing, right? That's not right. I don't think that's the way it's supposed to be. I don't think that's the way it's ever been. I think the way it's supposed to be is you hold it carefully and you mess with it. And then you pass it down. And you teach your child to mess with it. You make sure your child is gamirna and savirna. And the litmus test for did they mess with it well is does it achieve its ultimate purpose? The rabbis didn't care if you had Shabbos on Saturday or Wednesday. They didn't care if you were eating shrimp or a cheeseburger or brisket. What they cared about was that this enterprise called Judaism, all of our religious technologies, our practices, our rituals, our prayers, serve to create a certain kind of human being. And they had a very clear notion of who this certain kind of human being would be. A person who is profoundly empathic, connected, who was so crash flex that you could tolerate the ambiguity of crashes and going option 3, that you would seek out complexity rather than simplicity, the gray rather than the black and the white, the hidden rather than the apparent. That's our ultimate goal, is to be this certain kind of person. And your job is to figure out what practices, what rituals, which of the values and technologies of this master story that you've created should we be passing down or tweaking or chucking, so that for our children they'll have a tradition that helps them be that kind of person. Should we do a text? Yeah? Okay. Let's pass this one on. Okay, while the papers are going around, thoughts, questions, challenges? Mm-hmm.
I think the rabbis do care what we eat.
Yeah.
Because if we have a specific style of eating, we're more likely to eat with each other and less likely to eat with the cheeseburger eaters. And that keeps our culture more defined. And I think that's important.
Fair enough. Yep.
I have a question on minhag.
Yep.
So like with Pesach coming up, right? I had a question about minhag.
Custom. Her question is about custom. Go ahead.
Thinking about it because like Pesach is coming up.
Yep.
So like I grew up with like a ton of minhag. Like we eat this, we don't eat this. These groups eat this, these groups don't eat this. You can have this because you're part of this group, but you can't have that. And so it's custom, right? So it seems like okay, if you kind of break it, it's fine. It's not like a law, but like at least the way it was passed down to me, it almost seems like law.
Yeah.
So how do you kind of, I don't really know what my question is, but I guess what I'm trying to think about is like how do you ingest, like how do you, not literally, but how do you like think about that? How do you ingest that?
Big question. I'm going to put a sticky on it. It's a big question. It's going to take us a little bit far afield. Okay. Yep.
You talked a lot about what the rabbis did,
Yep.
and what their goals were. And I'm wondering how much of it you think was conscious.
Yeah.
And because it seems to me a lot of talking about some of them for several centuries,
Yeah.
and I don't see how it fits into this era.
Yeah.
But in general, the rabbis are creating all these new myths.
Yeah.
Are they thinking, oh, this is a great thing, people are going to buy this, or did they, live in the system? For them, it was real.
Yeah. Also, big question, a great question. I'm not sure of the answer. It's a debate that goes on in the community of option 3ers. I happen to think that the rabbis were very self-aware in what they were doing. I think they were great sociologists and anthropologists. Others say that that's not really how option 3 happens. It really happens more organically, and we can. I'm not sure, but it's a great question. Okay, real quick. Yes, I will repeat the question. That was quick, thank you. Okay, so we only have about 10 minutes left. So I know some of you learned this text last week Was it last week? Raise your hand if you learned it last week. Oh, a bunch of you. Okay, but not everybody did. So I'm going to run through it real quickly with you. Okay? So this is my text to basically answer those of you who are sitting there going, but hey, you're making this shit up. I don't believe that that's really how it worked. And so I want to share with you this text because it's a snapshot of a time when this crash, our previous crash, was very, very real. And it's a Jewish text that talks about option 1, option 2, option 3. So now that you've seen this little scheme, let's look back at this text. So one day I was walking on the way and encountered a certain man who was on his way to heresy. He believed in Torah, but he did not believe in Mishnah. He said to me, the Torah was given to us from Mount Sinai, but the Mishnah was not given to us from Mount Sinai. Okay, the narrator of this story, is he an option 1, option 2, or option 3 person? Narrator is a 3. I guess I asked you the question a little bit prematurely, that's for sure. You don't know much about him. But yeah, I'm going to say he's an option 3 person, probably was an early rabbi. He's a Gamirna and Savirna person, a player. And this one who is walking on the way, on his way to heresy, is he an option 1, option 2, or option 3 person? You know, I can't make up my mind. Is he a 1 or is he a 2? Okay, so he believes in Torah, right? That's from God, but this Mishnah, you made that up. So he's kind of option 1, except at this point in history, right? There is no option 1, no more temple, so he's kind of by default 2. I can't make up my mind. Maybe he's over here. He's on his way. Yeah, he's on his way to McDonald's. I don't know. He's out of here. He's either going, I'm out of here, or the narrator is saying he's staying orthodox, and I mean that with a small o, and that's what's being labeled heresy, which is also really interesting. Right? Okay. And I said to him, my son, aren't the Torah and Mishnah both from the mouth of the Great One? Wink, wink. Right? So he's trying to sell oral law as having come from God, yeah? And then what difference is there between Torah and Mishnah? And I told him a parable to explain. There was once a king of flesh and blood. Anytime in a parable you've got a king of flesh and blood, who is it? God. Okay, good. Who had 2 servants whom he loved greatly. To each he gave an amount of wheat and a bundle of flax. So to this servant, God gave a bundle of wheat and a bundle of flax to the king. The king gave to this servant a bundle of wheat and a bundle of flax. The bright one of the 2, what did he do? He took the flax and he wove it and he made a cover, and he took the wheat and he made flour. He sifted the flour and he ground it and he kneaded it and he baked it and he placed the loaf on the table and spread over it the cover. Do you see all the verbs of transformation here? Kneaded it, sifted it, baked it, placed it, ground it. He messed with that a lot. And he made it into something that was unrecognizable. Thank you very, very much. Unrecognizable from the raw material that he received. Now, if you had gotten this wheat and flour from the king, would you have done that? I would not have. I would have been like, oh, I want to take really good care of it. I want to guard it, right? I would not have been, I don't think I would have. The foolish one of the 2 did nothing at all. I kind of feel bad for the foolish one. He's getting like short shrift here. If you said to him, you didn't do anything with this, what would he have said? Yeah, what do you mean I did nothing? I guarded it. I took care of it. I preserved it. I handed it down to my children, just like I got it, right? Sure, he didn't do nothing. Very careful about it. After some time, the king came back to his house and he said to them, my children, bring me what I gave you. One brought out the loaf on the table with the cover spread over it, and the other brought out the wheat in a pile and the bundle of flax on it. Oi, what an embarrassment. Okay, oi is in the original. I swear to God, oi is in the original. It is. Aleph, Vav is Oy, with a Yud. Oy, what an embarrassment. Oy, what a shame. Which one of them do you think was more beloved? The one that brought out the table and the loaf on it, obviously. I'm going to skip this next paragraph. What's the moral of the story? Transformation is good. Torah is it's raw material. Could the guy who made the challah have made pita? Sure. Could he have made bagels? Sure. Could he have made chapatis? Sure. Right? I don't think the king would have cared. He took this raw material and he made it into something that was nourishing, right? Was something. What's the cover? I can't figure out what the cover, what's the deal with the cover?
Protection?
Maybe? I don't know. I know it's the challah cover. That I know. But why? Why? Like, what's in the symbolism of the challah cover? Is it protection? Is it beauty? Is it?
Kedusha. It's about both. It's about having this other material that complements it. And so it's useful to both are useful to one another.
Okay.
So like you cover it so that, I mean, you kind of know what's there, but you don't until you unveil it.
Yeah. Maybe. Speaking of flies, and you made me think about the challah again. Who ever made challah out of a bunch of flour? Only. Nobody, right? You make challah out of flour. What else do you need to do? You need to add a bunch of stuff, right? You cannot make flour out. You can't make challah out of Torah unless you add stuff. You got to add the salt. You got to add the oil, the yeast, the water. You got to add a bunch of stuff. Oh, wow.
Like that we all have, even those of us who want to place ourselves in free. I would like to place myself in free. I don't think I'm really free. But I think we all want to in your story put ourselves in free because it feels like the most hopeful for the future.
Yeah.
But even people that are in free who hold so tight, who want so much for this endeavor called Judaism to survive.
Yeah.
There's a part of us that like we want to cover up what we create because it's so precious to us. And we're so afraid that if it looks different, you know, that it's going to get destroyed. It's going to be something, I don't know, there's something in that.
Yeah. I love it. Okay. So the alarm went off saying, Benay, you better get in your taxi. But I just want to wrap up and say that I want to invite you all to get very, very serious about being players in our Jewish future. Accept that it's going to be unrecognizable and that that's not a bad thing. Accept that not a lot of people are going to come along and stop counting because it's not about numbers right now. It's about creating good shit. And if you're going to get serious about being a player, you're going to have to get gamirna. You're going to have to learn. There are all sorts of ways you can learn in this community. And if you want to come to Chicago, do I have a little brochure for you? Okay. All sorts of ways to learn. Use the svara that's yours. Every one of you has a queerness that only you get and only you can bring to this tradition. You know it because of the way in which you've been outside. Tradition needs to hear what you have to bring to it. We all do this. just might have another couple thousand years in which we're creating people who are that ideal kind of human being. It doesn't matter what it looks like. It doesn't matter how we get there. It's going to take a lot of imagination and a lot of courage and a lot of just trying shit, most of which is not going to work. And welcome aboard to the unrecognizable Jewish future. Thank you.